Please.
When you were talking about how the internet can be involved, what about people who use the darknet to get access to our systems?
You know, I'm not a guru and have no working knowledge of the darknet.
What should up, maybe what?
So
I've heard about it.
Yeah, asking for a friend. So I just don't know really too much, but I think the same principles exist. And I spoke about this at the Pell Center back east with some folks that were internet security experts, and basically I think they deferred to me in the position, you just want to avoid the internet altogether. If there's any link to the internet, or you're dealing with anybody that's been infected with the internet and the ability for buttons to travel through it, you're just in a bad position. So the idea is to remove the system from that possible affectation, have it stand alone, have it transparent with a lot of eyeballs, everybody watching each other, and then a mass amount of redundancy with the paper ballot that I suggested, and then, if possible, breaking it into small batches, as it is easier to get a real tight security over 100 or 1,000 ballots than it is when you throw 1 million altogether, which is kind of like the way they're doing it now with central tabulation. Fortunately, as I mentioned, this is not complicated for people that really know how to put together a proper system and make this a tight environment. This is not that complicated. It's a political will issue. Again, blocking the systems that should have already been brought in, keeping them on the sidelines, and this again, and speaking bluntly, in my hometown, is Microsoft and Silicon Valley and their control over the political process. I think San Francisco is going to break free of it and set the precedent.
Are you aligned in any way with the Electronic Frontier Foundation?
That's an interesting question. You know, there's a book right now out called Winners Take All, and I would refer you to it. It is about the elite and how they position as activists often to not perhaps perpetuate problems, but at least be involved with some position regarding solution. And Mitch Kapoor was one of the founders of Electronic Frontier Foundation. He is also a main principal in a group called, he was actually the funder for a group called Open Source Election Technology. They used to be called Open Source Digital Voting. And they've been a real thorn in the side of the pioneering open source voting folks, because they popped up overnight and sort of laid claim to the space. Electronic Frontier Foundation does some real good work, I'm sure, somewhere. They just haven't done it here in this space.
Oh, yeah.
So they make me nervous, and I recognize that I could get pushback because a lot of people fully support EFF, but I note that they are absent in this arena, and it makes me wonder about them.
They're very much into the network neutrality argument, and also there's something else. They went against patent trolls, people that were just coming, just basically trying, using the patent system against people that were really.
Sounds like two valid positions they have there that I'm aligned with. I'm just not aligned with them on this one, and so we haven't seen them come to the table. But we've been very disappointed in a lot of the activists that you would think would be leading the charge here. ACLU comes to mind, completely absent, horrifyingly absent from this push for public software. NAACP, again, same situation. Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, all of them have been lobbied, for lack of a better term, to come forward and lend their support to this issue, and we hear crickets. I won't belabor the point, but you get the idea. Luckily, San Francisco County is strong on this issue, and now I think these groups, Common Cause, People for the American Way, ACLU, they'll come in now.
I belong to all of those.
Great, and they'll come in now, but unfortunately, we couldn't get them in earlier, and I think that's been part of the delay in moving this forward as quickly as we would have liked.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. Your name's Brent, right?
I'm sorry?
Your name's Brent. My name's Otto. It's Otto Duffy. It's nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
nice meeting you.
I have a lot of questions about this. Well, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how, as I understand the world, how this fits in, what its priority is. I'm glad that Susan brought up those questions, and I think that might have been a bit of a surprising answer for Susan, that these organizations aren't necessarily working,
Yeah, I think they're coming on board because California Clean Money came forward to help us, and they are likable. Whereas to other activists, I'm maybe just not that likable.
Those organizations, the Electronic Frontier and the ACLU, they both have idiosyncrasies about what they do. Idiosyncrasies.
Yes.
All right, here's my question. You started to move down, and you sounded like you were kind of negative about this, but I'm kind of excited about internet voting. You try to get as many people to vote as you can, and right now you got to fill out this paper ballot and put it in the mail, or alternately you got to hike down 3 blocks. And I worked a precinct that had a hill in it, and precincts are very small in San Francisco because it's a dense population. But in this particular case, you had to walk. Some places had to walk like half a mile to get up this hill to the voting station.
Yes.
I used to work one of those.
It was near Hawk Hill, over in the inner Sunset. It was off 19th Avenue in Terravelle. So that's my question. Be very clear about what your take on internet voting is. I thought it was going to work.
I understand your question. When I referenced internet voting before, I was speaking specifically of keeping the current model of voting system separated from the internet for the reason that these vendors are carrying bugs from the internet into the system, and we don't have proper defense in place. Regarding the separate issue of internet voting, that's another issue which what I would say is it's probably better than what we have right now. And certainly the convenience factor for people that don't enjoy Ebola, for people that, because that's going to be an issue when we have diseases rampant through our country as they have in other countries. You don't want to congregate people, you want to keep them separated, and convenience, and for the disability community, these are all reasons why we want to think about internet voting. Unfortunately, the internet is quite a Wild West environment, as you know. So where the science seems to be going right now, which I have an interest in, is in smartphone voting. Because it's a little different than internet voting in that it utilizes short codes and other benefits that the smartphone allow for. And it can also have certain authentication with retina scans and fingerprints, and it can be open sourced, so it is relegated to specific phones, and then blockchain may come into play, and other technology aspects. But the main thing is, and the real beauty of a smartphone voting capability, is the voter's ability to check their vote at the end of the process to see that their vote was counted as they intended, and that would be a first in the United States, because currently it's faith-based. When you send your vote off into that hole, protect it as we might or upgrade the software, it's still faith-based. And the idea of the Better Pioneers is to create a database spreadsheet that would be accessible to the general public. You would be given a secret number that only you know, and then you could go into the system, see your ballot, and make sure that that in fact was exactly how you voted. If it was not, if the system's been corrupted, you have the opportunity to cry foul, and everybody in your precinct is encouraged to check their ballot. There is a certain axiom there that if 30%, I think, or 25% actually check their ballot and nobody cries foul, you've probably got a good election going on for that particular spreadsheet. And this is, I believe, the future. This completely wipes out the vendors, takes them out of the game, and topples the apple cart regarding these security concerns and reduces it down to the singular vote that would be cast by the smartphone. And this may in fact be the future, exactly what you're saying. Are we 10 years out? I don't know. Understand one thing though, when you talk about internet voting or smartphone voting, those same activists that I mentioned before that look to me to be gamey, they are against internet voting and against smartphone voting, and it makes you wonder why they're so interested in preserving the status quo. Please.
What happens if, say, for example, you have a landline, like me? I mean, I just am not in the financial ability to afford a
Right.
smartphone.
So then you would perhaps have the opportunity to go to an off-site, to a site,
Because now I do absentee.
to use a smartphone or an internet component, the library somewhere, or it wouldn't be either or, it would be all methods. So if you still wanted to vote by paper ballot, you could do that, and that would stay in place. So this would be in addition to methods rather than in replacement of, because we would never want to disenfranchise anybody that didn't have a smartphone or whatever. But you can imagine the turnout of the people in the neighborhoods that have smartphones that currently don't vote, and the youth that would vote if this were allowed. So there is a ballot measure called the Election Act 2020. So it's www.electionact2020.org, and that talks about not only making proprietary code illegal for elections in the state of California, but allowing smartphone voting. And if we do those two things, it turns the whole dynamic on its head.
I want to talk
What-
Diebold. Diebold was one of the machines in the year 2000.
Ohio 2004, yeah.
In Florida. And the man that ran that corporation was purported to have said that he was going to make sure W got in.
That's right. That was Wally Odell, and that was in Ohio 2004.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And yeah, that's just shows you that when you have these privatized vendors with agendas, it's not an appropriate situation for United States elections. I mean, these horror stories just go on, and if you looked at the ownership behind the voting system companies, it would be shocking. As these are people that you wouldn't want anywhere near your vote
Or your children.
or your children.
I don't,
Yeah, I'm still, my mindset is still trying how to fit the open software component of it, where that, how that fits and what.
Where the private software is now, you put the public software.
Yeah, but you got a system that's failing in every regard.
Yes.
So what I think about what Marvis' issue was, I think there's going to be a time when they're just going to give you a smartphone. Everyone's going to have access to one.
I think I think you're right. We go in baby steps because it took us a long time to even get this issue on the radar for people. So we don't want to blow their minds completely, but I think you are correct. So I can only speak the truth when called on the carpet.
You know,
I think you're speaking the truth.
So, when we, like you said, there's like people that are holding us back and forces, like, I don't know, the Matrix or something. When we try to get clean, renewable energy, we're always stopped. And you know, there's like 6 billion times more energy, solar energy, wind energy, there's like, than anyone could ever use.
Right, that's right. It's the same issue. It's almost planned obsolescence, planned defeatism, but now, you know, PG&E murders enough women and children and animals, and you might get a response from the people. I mean, right now, we can't even walk outside. The children are breathing, and this is PG&E hard at work.
Remember the manhole cover that blew up down the
It's
Natural
all,
District?
it's the
killed her.
people versus the corporations, and we're fighting for the good of the children. And so here we are in this moment, and I think it's all becoming obvious to everybody regarding the grid and regarding counting votes, that if we allow the government to just run off the rails and we don't keep them in check, the corporations will take over the world, and we'll be walking around in gas masks without proper leadership. And so that's where we are. I'll take one more question, Adam, courtesy to our next speaker. I'm sorry?
Denise is next.
Go ahead.
I just want to make a comment about how difficult. So, see, some of the machines that we're using are from 2005. Am I right? And some of those machines, some of them only count one vote at a time, one field at a time, like one race at a time. So how are we going to get? And then they say we have like how many hundreds of thousands of votes yet to count on the, you know. And they're just gonna recycle the ballots right back into the machines again.
Right. So it's not you know, silly talk. You can't do a recount on the same machine that you just botched in the initial job. So with proper architecture and proper systems, everything will tighten up and the speed will be increased. And the cost will come down, allowing for more machines, and you take the vendors out of play, and then you have a nice environment. What we don't want to do right now is go buy another, this time it won't be $4.5 billion though. This time the price tag is going to be $9 billion. It'll be double. So what we don't want to do, which is what a lot of these activists that just talk about paper ballots and keep the open source part off the table, is go buy another $9 billion worth of these same machines again. And that's what we're setting up to do right now in the United States. And that's what our leaders, even in the Democratic Party, are contemplating, is going and buying another $9 billion worth of the crappy machines all over again, when they are being told by the scientists, these machines don't work and they're not secure. So this is the race right now. We're trying to get these public systems like San Francisco is doing in front of that market and these vendors, so that we're not, again, making the same mistake. And it's just so preposterous that we're even having this conversation.
We have other things to do.
Absolutely.
So, Otto, if you want to talk to him after the meeting, you can.
Sure.
If you can stay for the rest and talk to Otto.
I will get Otto's information, and I appreciate everybody coming out tonight and your invitation. And I think that
Thanks, Denise.
if the Tenderloin and the community in the Tenderloin can really get their arms around this issue, it's very powerful for San Francisco County. And San Francisco County is the leader county in the world right now on this issue. So if you can get with us and grasp this and support and advocate, it really does make a difference for the world, because San Francisco County is leading and it's a race right now. So Mayor Breed and the supervisors, everybody needs to know, hey, we have an opportunity here. Let's move forward and not allow some outside interest to come in and meddle with this effort and take it off track. That's the main thing, is we need to shepherd this proper system through to completion, and then from there, we'll be in better shape as a country. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Cheers.
Hearing on the recently published 2017-2018 Civil Grand Jury Report entitled Open Source Voting in San Francisco. Agenda item number 4 is a hearing on the recently published 2017-2018 Civil Grand Jury Report entitled Crisis Intervention, Bridging Police and Public Health.
Thank you so much. And for this next item, we have Grady Ward, who is presenting for the Civil Grand Jury on open source voting. We will have public comment on all 3 items together.
Hi, thank you so much, Supervisor Kim and, Chairperson Kim and the rest of the supervisors. I just want to first start by thanking the rest of the committee that I worked with. This was not a production of myself alone, but of a really dedicated committee of 4 people who set out to understand this really complex issue. And our goal in this report was trying to dig past a lot of rhetoric and idealism and fear around open source voting, which tends to come attached with a lot of preconceived notions of what it means and what it would require. And thankfully, I think in doing this, we also kind of exposed some general principles of why projects that have support fail to gain traction. And I'm hoping today to focus on those principles so that we can, not only learn from this specific example, but hopefully, increase the effectiveness and efficiency of other projects inside the city as well. So we really found that this project had been in a relatively static state for about a decade. It had been in a hypothetical exploration with relatively broad support from city stakeholders, but hadn't gained significant momentum or traction, or really been established as an actual project out of a planned project or proposed project. The dominant 2 reasons for this were uncertainty and risk aversion. Uncertainty because there was not a clear project owner, because this project cuts across several layers of city governance and capability. It was also uncertain in that there was such great uncertainty around timeline, funding, and scope that there wasn't a reasonable path forward that could be approved or debated effectively. And the risk aversion piece of this is pretty obvious. Switching to a new election system is pretty dangerous if you are not confident that the election system, is totally flawless. And elections also kind of lend themselves to incredibly hard to develop software. They're incredibly infrequent. You don't get do-overs, you can't replay an election, and there's almost no tolerance for fault. So because of all of this, the Department of Elections was really hesitant to take on this project, and because of this kind of distribution of responsibility and experience, we saw that this project hadn't gained a lot of traction. So that's kind of the overview of what we found. Within that, there are a couple of common themes that I think we can look to and learn from the city as a whole, looking at any project. The first is that all projects need really clearly defined responsibility structures and need to have the experience of the city appropriately leveraged to mirror the, have the structure of city experience mirrored to best suit the project. The second piece is that outsourcing our decision-making is not an effective strategy. So there have been several independent reports, several consultant reports on whether or not we should pursue an open source voting system or what the realized costs and benefits of that would be. Those have generally been pretty inconclusive, and the reason for it is that at the heart of it, this is a question about balancing a broad set of priorities, not about whether or not something is technically feasible or is something or will cost an amount of dollars, right? And so we think that those are kind of the generic lessons we can hope to learn from this project. In terms of the responses that we got on this, the majority of responses were generally, agreeing with the overall sentiment of, requiring funding and direction. I think that there are obviously a lot of perspectives in this discussion and argument, and the majority of the majority of the responses point toward the fact that San Francisco is moving toward this and has taken on many of the steps that are requisite to actually making this project successful. So that ends my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ward. We do, and I forgot to announce this at the beginning of the hearing, on behalf of the Elections Commission, we do have our director, John Artz, as well as our commission president, Roger Donaldson, and Chris Jordanak, the chair of the Open Source Voting Technical Advisory Committee. And so, colleagues, if you have any questions for our department, also Department of Technology Director Lisa Gurl, and Controller's Office, Tonya Ledju, and Mark De La Rosa is also here to answer any questions on the open source voting system. All right, I'm seeing no questions for our departments. I'm going to ask that Rasha Harvey come up to present on behalf of the civil grand jury. I also want to acknowledge that Commander Ann Mannix is here on behalf of the police department, as well as our Director of Behavioral Health, Kavus Gain Basiri, with Department of Public Health.
Hello, Chair Kim, Supervisors Peskin and Brown. I handed in a written response Cavo made to the civil grand jury, and I just want to thank all the supervisors and late Mayor Lee and current Mayor Breed for their support of the open source voting system. We at Open Voting Consortium and now more currently the California Association of Voting Officials are the pioneers of this open source election system work nationally, and as well as this project, and recognize switching to a new election technology takes time. It's not necessarily complicated to build out the system. There's precedent in New Hampshire, but if we're going to do it right, obviously we have to garner the political will. That's taken about 10 years, and now we're glad to see Linda Jarrell and the Department of Technology step in, and we can hopefully get started. This year's civil grand jury called me in to discuss the Cavo response, and the new grand jury accepted the information I presented, and I had some corrections to the report. It seemed to be basically founded in the Slalom report, and I've gone on record in front of the Election Commission to say that the Slalom report, we believe, was erroneous in a lot of ways. They didn't speak to the real pioneers, the real knowledgeable folks that have accomplished open source voting nationally, and we directed them to do so, but they did not. It is great news that we look like we're moving toward a general public license open source system now, and we recognize there's been 2 failed projects, one in Travis County, Texas, and one in Los Angeles, and with the Department of Technology now involved, we think we're going to avoid those pitfalls. Thank you again for your dedication to this issue and carrying it forward. Thank you.